and you guys can spread around. Graham, you heard from earlier on today. This fine young gentleman you heard from earlier on today. Jeff is joining us. Jeff has a company. I've just gone blank on the name of the damn company. I knew I'd get that.
Yeah.
DevHub, which is a startup. It's all a business that's about helping healthcare startups.
Yep, medtech, health tech startups, research, design, product development, product design.
And he is tied to, he's based around Raisin University in...
yes, Raisin University, Bangkok, Thailand.
Okay, and my name is Dave McCoggin, and I do a lot of stuff helping brands figure out their stories and helping brands figure out the narratives behind their stories. Now, if I have the remote, and there should be a thing up there so that I can go forward. We're going to rethink real-time data and talk about that. If you Google real-time data, that's what Google shows you. A bunch of meaningless graphs and some words that reflect things like big data and stuff that realistically nobody really understands. So we're going to try and discuss what real data means in the healthcare industry. The guys have different points of view from a research background, helping companies build startups and etc. and use the data. And this fine young gentleman, Graham, and I go back 25 years, I think. We started working together. We're both from an advertising background, so we're looking at how you use the research and create stories using it. Now, before we get into that, I just want to make a point about something. So my fine friend Nucci, who also worked for me at one stage a long time ago, made a little joke about me, who I'm pretty sure I am the second oldest person in the room. Thank God Nicholas is here. And let me just explain something, because it actually ties up to something that when we heard about cessation earlier on. The reason I do not have my cell phone alarm is because I suffer terribly from insomnia. I have suffered from insomnia since I was a child. And in recent years, it was getting worse and worse. So I went to see a couple of specialists, and both specialists told me, do you have a mobile phone? Well, of course I have a mobile phone. Do you sleep with it in your room? Yes, I sleep with it in my room. And they said, all the research shows that no matter how well or badly you sleep, if you leave the cell phone outside of your bedroom, on average you'll sleep an hour more every night. So my wife banned cell phones from our bedroom. And that's why I don't use one. It is actually, it's called cellular cessation. And it's all about ceasing the use of cell phones. So, now, the other thing I just want to remind people of is a very interesting thing about phones, etc. So, when we're thinking about big data, we are surrounded with these devices that we carry with us everywhere that are collecting data, and the way we interface with that is so different. Exactly 30 years ago, and I'm that old, 30 years ago, I can remember the first time I ever spoke at a conference where somebody introducing the conference said, can everybody in the room that has mobile phones please switch them off? Now, 30 years ago in 1988, not many people in a room this size would have had a mobile phone, and they were about this big. But you had to switch it off. Now, of course, we don't even bother with that now, because we make the assumption that either you're going to sit there and take photos of us and Google us, or you're going to start watching porn because we're boring, one or the other, right? I don't mind which one you do. We are surrounded with devices. I'm sure most people in this room have or know lots of people that use different devices like this, that are used to collect data constantly. And of course, the premise is, no, it's not about collecting data for us, it's about you collecting data for yourself. But the reality is it's all about real-time big data collection that allows you to compare yourself with databases, etc., etc., etc. Now, some of that collection, of course, is built on mythologies. Does anybody try to walk 10,000 steps or more a day? Yes? Anybody do that? Why do you do why is it 10,000? Because the app told you to. Exactly. Why does the app tell you 10,000? Does anybody know? Okay, interesting piece of history. The first app that developed the idea that was sold that got you to walk 10 and measured the steps was actually sold in conjunction with the 1964 Olympic Games held in Tokyo. And a Japanese company invented this little gizmo you would hang off your belt that measured your steps. And their promotion piece was that you should be walking 10,000 steps a day to be just like the Olympians. Why was it 10,000? Nothing to do with health. It was because 10,000 in Japanese is a lucky number. It has no health actual fact behind it. It's a myth that's just grown and grown and grown for all these years. Of course, it doesn't do you any harm, and Steve, well done if you keep it up. Most of you have probably thought of buying watches, etc., that measure all sorts of things. And of course, now your measure not only a watch can now measure your steps, it can also measure your heart rate, etc. We are very, very close, and a couple of research companies that I've dealt with in the United States have now got trial models of on their mobile phones where you'll actually have your brain waves measured so that you can actually see how your brain is measuring and reacting to every single stimulus that's going on around you. And that data will be collected, of course, and centrally collected back by the providers to allow to check your stimulation against different things. That's real-time data collection. So we were gathered together to have a think about this. And so I'd like to start off by asking each of these three gentlemen to ask the rest of us a question. And I've asked them each to think of what's the one question they would like to ask the rest of the people on the panel in relation to real-time data. Vince, you want to go first?
My question to the esteemed panelists is, are consumers ready to digest the real-time data that we have planned for them?
Yeah, look, I think there's certainly an appetite for digesting real-time data. I think consumers need help. I was looking at some stats before coming to this conversation. It's the volume of data that they have to look at, and it's in very disparate formats. It's in buckets that are not necessarily associated with one another. So consumers tap into small aspects of a much larger data pool. I think we're still a long way away from the concept of health scoring. I think that'll be the eventual future. Will there be some mechanism whereby we can live off a health score, which is a true aggregation of probably self-propagated data from wearables and so on, and also societal data you can measure against. But there's certainly an appetite. I think the interesting thing is those with the largest appetite are the healthy, who want to remain healthy. And I think all of your examples there were examples of healthy people wanting to stay fit or be fitter. I think the big hurdle is having sick people want that sort of data and to wear wearables that help them manage their illness.
Jeff?
I think that's a really good insight, is that the healthy people, they kind of gamify it, right? It's a culture. And the big hurdle is getting sick people to adopt it. But I would also say the general product technology that you can buy is still really far from where it needs to be, in my opinion. Like the iWatch, if you wrap it around a roll of toilet paper, you'll see a heartbeat, right? It's true, yeah. So like the level of sophistication in actual medical products in the hospital and the wearables that we can buy and use, there's a big gap. So how people collect this data, how they interpret this data, and they delete it, they distort it, they overreact to it. So it's definitely growing. People will continue to adopt it, but I think it's still in its kind of infancy.
What do you think, Vince?
Oh, great question. Great question. We should never underestimate consumers' appetite for information and insight to help them better. And I think us walking into the field of data analytics, of AI, etc., with an assumption that consumers are not ready, absolutely, it has to be packaged right, it has to be guided right, and we have to bring them to that platform. But humans are remarkable people. Our brain processing is remarkable. So I think if we do guide and provide that and move them through that narrative and help them, then absolutely. You're absolutely right, Graham. In terms of patient activation, we measure that through a validated scale, and we're seeing that there are different health consumers out there that are activated towards health differently. So the trick is, how do you get those that aren't so activated, which is the billion-dollar question, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think one of the things that we have to take on board is a stuff that nearly everybody that's been up on stage today has talked about, which is whether we think it's true or not, people have massive self-egos, and they love to be able to measure themselves against other people. Nucci showed that Nike ad, right? I mean, the fact is that we all love to know that I've got 194,000 fans and you've only got 96,000, you know, or I got 55 likes for the stupid little video that I posted this morning. That's real-time data, right? That's feeding our ego, maybe not necessarily our physical health, but maybe our mental health. And I think the refinements are just how do we make it more accessible, easy to use, et cetera, et cetera. Graham, you had an interesting question.
Yes, something I've been grappling with for some time is, you know, health is incredibly personal and people are naturally protective of personal data. But financial information is equally, maybe more sensitive than health. We divulge that reasonably at random to a whole host of companies, banks that we bank with, credit card companies, insurance companies. So consumers are willing to divest information as it relates to non-health matters. When it comes to health, they're very protective. And we haven't really found a mechanism that enables or makes consumers willing to share their personal health data. So what does the health and wellness industry, people in this room, need to do to motivate people to share their health data? Because that's a missing piece of the puzzle.
Jeff, ideas?
Monetize it.
Yeah.
So if you Google, I just sneezed and it came out blue, your data is sold. You go visit your doctor, your medical record for that day, the data is scrubbed and then sold. So your fitness trackers, your Google searches, those are not scrubbed, right? And typically you have your name and personal information connected to those. The actual medical information is supposed to be scrubbed by law, and then it's resold. And I think there's enough people in the world where if you could monetize it, and it was like you're saying, you're keeping track of your life, you're measuring yourself against other people, you're gamifying certain things. I think everybody takes a picture of their meal almost every time anyways. So the problem with a lot of the data sets that we get in the health industry is that there's a lack of accuracy, right? So if you could create some kind of platform that had more accuracy, you knew who the person was, but the data was scrubbed, but it was a single data point. And you could, if they agreed to wear a fitness tracker, you could measure off of that. If you gave them some secure site where they could search, you knew what their searches was, but everything that was being sold, they were getting money from instead of not getting money from it. I think it would incentivize people.
Vince?
I think it's a data issue everywhere, just in terms of the security of that data, how it's being used, the context in which the insight is coming from as well, and that tends to lead to distrust. We won't mention the American political scene at this stage, but that's an example in which big data has some way to go in terms of what we do with it and what we share and how it's being used. So I think we need to ensure people or assure people just in terms of the rigor on how it is actually being used and and who's got access to it and what's going on. And absolutely monetize it, gamify it, and so forth.
So the idea of monetizing or gamifying or legislating, China, it's becoming legislated that you have to, everybody has the universal card, etc. The Indian Supreme Court just last week, I think it was, or the end of the week before, passed the new or approved with some revisions the new ID system. So basically, in the next couple of years, over 1 billion Indians will have finger and retinal scans as the way in which they can actually access anything. Mm-hmm. And they won't be able to access things like bank accounts, driver's licenses, unless they have their fingerprint. More important, their retinal scan. And of course, one of the back things behind that is that once you get retinal scans, you can read an awful lot of health issues through that, right? Now, blockchain is the big thing that everybody's talking about at the moment. Just last night, I was on a 2-hour call with some people in America that are looking at blockchain for market research purposes and have developed a scheme, but it's based around the universal basic wage model, that everybody in America will be offered literally a basic wage of $20 a day to participate in the model, and it will be continually ongoing. So I think these sorts of systems, one way or the other, compensation models will be able to actually incentivize or force people to do it one way or the other.
Okay.
Maybe.
The challenge is for marketeers to solicit data. As I said, we give data voluntarily to our banks, but we don't give data voluntarily to GSK or to J&J. Now, why is that? I mean, I saw really probably two themes come out of that. One is we've got to build trust. You touched on that. Is it secure? Will it be used in a fair manner? Will I receive fair and accurate advice as a consequence of that? And utility, value. If there's some value back to me. I think financial institutions give value.
Sure.
When I share that, I get something back.
And yet, what could be of more value than your health, right? So,
yeah, if they can add value to my
if they can add value to your health.
by using my data.
Yeah, but then again, as I pointed out, doing 10,000 paces a day for millions of people around the world is a value add that they believe in and measure, intimately, and it's based on a bit of a cultural myth, So imagine if you give them some statistics or some real stuff. Jeff, you had a good question too.
I did.
But yeah, with your thing, you answered it.
I left my phone at my desk, so let me think of a good question. You were just talking about going in India and America and monetizing this. How does the company interpret the data it collects, and then how does it present it back to the user in a way that the user can interpret it and get real value as devices improve, accuracy improves?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean,
And anybody that's tried to merge data sets from different sources, whether it's mobile tech through to sales, etc., claims data, knows that the one big lesson is you need to learn to fail. Sorry, not fail, but to learn. It is hard work. Data is not clean. So working with data is incredibly difficult. So what we're talking about is someone will do it and crack it, but it is tough work.
It's tough work. So with that in mind, yes. I don't know if you three guys have seen, there's a company an English company called Future Agenda that does these global studies annually on big subjects. Last year, their big subject was on health data. And what they do is they go into I think they went into 40 cities around the world where they held long 1-day or 2-day workshops with groups of about 40 or 50 experts of all types. Their report is worth looking up. There's a freebie report about 80 pages in depth. They looked at a lot of Asian marketplaces. They measure the marketplaces in terms of, in this particular subject, they scale them. The colour of your country is about how strict the legislation is about data security. You can see that, places like Japan, Singapore is too small, but it is a blue country. Japan, Australia, etc., are very safe. India, it's saying, is not very safe, but then the Supreme Court things of the last 2 weeks will probably be changing the way we think about that. But interestingly, out of all that report, when they looked across those markets, they found that the top 3 challenges in markets with high privacy regulation was combining data sets, exactly what you said, getting closer to the patient, because actually having the data, as we've talked about, and getting close to people is one thing, and trust, just that whole basic area of trust. But the big opportunities were artificial intelligence and the way in which we won't necessarily have to ask anybody to do anything. We will gather it through artificial intelligence methods. Genetic profiling as a way in which we can actually find out if we have Native American ancestors, apparently.
Yes.
Anyway, if you don't get that joke, watch the news today.
Elizabeth Warren.
Or rather listen to Trump's latest diatribe. And predictive analysis. So lots of possibilities with that. But I asked these guys to answer the next question, but before I find out their answers, I'm going to ask you to all do a very simple exercise in real-time data gathering. Now, to do that, you all have to stand up. Okay? Now, I'm going to show you a question, and the answer to the question is a 5-point scale. 1 means I disagree. 5 means I really agree. And I want you to move either to 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, where you think you fit in the room in answering this question. On a 1 to 5 scale, is real-time data a good thing or bad? 1, it's no good. 5, it's excellent. Move. Where do you fit? Physically move. Physically move. It's good for you, right? You can get about 15 of your 10,000 steps in this way. Well, that's pretty interesting, right? So let's all remember, my life has been as a market researcher for 30 years, that Asia is noted for the fact that typically on any Liggett scale, correct me if I'm wrong, Asians don't like to go to the extremes, right? They love to sit more in the middles. So it's usually be the 3s or 4s and not so many of the 5s. So interesting. Guys, what did you guys say? I know one of you said 2.5. Thank you. What did you think?
5.
5?
For sure.
10.
10. Oh, 10. Very interesting. So our little exercise, real-time data says that an awful lot of experts in the health field think that this is a very good thing. The problem is going to be how we do it, right? So take your 15 steps back to your seat, if you like. Thank you for participating. I'm told that this is all being recorded, so you're now part of a live experiment. Now, we talked about how to make it more interesting. How many of you have ever attended CES in Las Vegas? Yes? Great. You know, every marketer should at least once go to CES, held in January, early January in Las Vegas. It's the #1 new tech show in the world. One of the most interesting products from this year's CES was a new product from L'Oreal. It's a UV sensor. Now, that's the sensor at the moment. It looks like a little disc that you actually stick on your nail. Actually, what they're working on is within the next 2 years, it will be a false nail. And so when the ladies in the room go and get their nails done, you just fit a false nail over one of your nails, and it measures UV rays. It measures where you are. So it's GPS.
GPS.
Thank you. It's GPS connected, so it measures exactly where you are, 24 hours a day, what the sun rays are, what the UV rays are, and what your skin condition is, and we'll send it back to an app on your phone. But also, of course, it will send that information back to L'Oreal's database. So imagine if 25 million people, women around the world, and men, I'm sure they're going to figure out a way to sell this to men as well, for those of us that don't necessarily paint our nails every day, just on Saturday nights. Hey, we live in Bangkok. We do that, right?
Yeah.
But so, you know, it's a fantastic, very casual, and this is what will happen more and more. It's not even truly a wearable. It's not a device. It's just part of my makeup, right? Of course, brands have been thinking about how to make data collection much more relevant and easier. Now, some of you that have heard me talk before will have heard me talk about toilets, because you cannot have a talk about in technology and health without talking about the single most important technology in the history of mankind, flushing toilets. This is the Toto toilet, and in it is a sensor. This was first released about 12 years ago, but in that Toto toilet, there's a sensor that when you pee into the toilet takes 17 different body measurements from your pee, different health measurements. Fantastic. How many of you remember that Toto, of course, is a Japanese company? What's the other leading Japanese health technology company? Nintendo. First of all, because of the brainwaves technology, software they came up with, but more importantly, the Wii machine. Now, what was interesting was when the Wii machine was introduced in Japan, they devised a system so that every time you played golf, tennis, or whatever your favourite sport, Wii sport was, you not only could read on your screen, it could be loaded up onto your computer so you could track how you were doing over time. It could also be sent to your doctor. And they actually did a deal with Toto so that you could pee into the toilet every day and it would measure all these different things through your urine, and it would also send your Wii activity back to your doctor, and the whole point of that was the ageing society. And it was ways in which they could get ageing people to do more exercise, measure the effect, and then be able to have doctors be able to do literally daily or more than daily reports on how much you were exercising, what exercise you were doing, and how that it was affecting body functions, etc., through your pee. Seems like a pretty good idea, right? Didn't really take off because people at the time thought it might be a bit too personal. But it's going to happen, right? Because this is behavioural real-time data collection. Interestingly, though, as we speak in America, this particular professor, Dr. Borkholder, has a new system that involves, it's a sensor built into your toilet seat, and it's aimed particularly for people that are likely to suffer from, have been predicted to suffer from heart failure. And this measures, every time you go to the toilet, it takes all these measurements so that it can predict whether your danger has increased. And the idea is that they'll be able to, every time you go to the toilet, tell you whether you're within half an hour of a heart failure occurrence. Now, this is not for everybody, but this is real-time data collection for people that have a real issue. I've got to get this, right? Because at my age, you need this sort of stuff. So that leads us to the next question. We want to, go back. Give us one practical clue as to how marketers could really use real-time data. Give me your idea of what's one idea. You've got one, I know.
Comment on
Yeah,
what you just showed.
please.
Yeah, my view is that's all gimmickry. You know, I think people need a health score. You can't measure, you can't measure everything with a multitude of apps and a multitude of gadgets you strap on your body. You've got to be having a holistic view to measurement. It's got to be physical, emotional, lifestyle, and that's the future. So these things measure such minute components of our health and well-being. Now, maybe the heart failure one, useful, that's a specific need state, but, measuring sun rays or measuring a couple of biometric readings is not going to make you any healthier. It's often gimmickry and it's often marketing-led because it does come back to a brand, which is fine. But I think we've got to sort of separate what's truly going to move the health and well-being of individual society forward with data and wearables versus what's a marketing activity.
But what is a good way marketers could use real-time data?
For me, it's personalisation. I think having access to, there's probably two types of data. There's aggregate data, there's societal data, and then there's individual data. There's the challenge of getting the individual data, the challenge of trust and utility. Will they share it with us? But even if it's aggregate data, it's incumbent on us now to become much more personal with our customers. We should be able to know precisely when to reach them, how to reach them, what to say to them in a way that's valuable to them, because we have the real-time data. And I just don't think we are anywhere near that at this point. We have pockets of excellence, I guess, from a marketing perspective, but we're not getting close enough to our customers, even though we have the data available to us. So it's personalization for me.
Okay. Thoughts?
I would say inspiration. You have to inspire the user. And I think as we go forward into the future, you're going to see less people seeking doctors reactively and more seeking them proactively. So I think if you had a clear understanding of your state of health and you had a certain set of goals and then you knew what you wanted to track, then you would be able to have kind of like new segments, new consumer groups to manage.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, we're trying to change behaviour. So we are marketers. Behavioural change has to be part of that mix. So anything that you can do with the real-time data that you have to prompt a behaviour change that increases health and wellness of that individual is going to benefit. The big practical area that we're seeing a lot of interest, which is, that there is a huge opportunity for health improvement, is simply around adherence. That is probably one area of untapped value from an industry perspective of getting people to take their consumer health or prescriptive health on the day they should, when they should, and for how long they should. So that, from a practical perspective, if your real-time data can prompt that behaviour change, then we're in good shape.
What about the audience? Has anybody got a thought about how marketers could or are using real-time data? Yes, sir, up the back.
No.
Real-time data could be used to make Mike's work.
So I had an interesting idea once upon a time. My name is Chris Blank, and I'm the founder and CEO of the largest pharmacy chain in Vietnam. And so I actually have a data science background as well. And a long time ago, one of the things that we wanted to do, which I never actually completed, but I think it would still be a great idea, would be to stick cameras in the store that can analyze like a gender profile of the shoppers, and then switch the displays or the advertisements on the screens in the TV stores to target the shoppers in that specific area, and then check to see if that improves sales. I always thought that would be kind of
I actually worked on a project in Japan a few years ago where, for a particular brand, don't think I'm allowed to say it, because they actually did this with signage inside the giant railway stations, Shinjuku, etc., stations inside Tokyo. So that as you approached the thing, it did a facial recognition thing and changed the ad to suit it. Now they had one particular product that took up the trial, and it was a feminine hygiene product. Unfortunately, they did it at a particular station, and one of the particular signage places was the place where trans people hung out a lot. And it confused the crap out of the machine. So, it was constantly sort of like, well, the president of that particular, it was the Japan office of a multinational Western American company, went to watch it. He's a very nice man, he's a very good friend of mine, but he did lose his temper because he kept on literally, in a very polite Japanese way, saying, "Dave-san, it's not fucking women it's talking to."
How long ago was that?
That was about 7 years ago.
Maybe today is different though, because
No, I think the technology is probably different. You can do it, right? So I think there's a lot of experiments with that sort of technology going on. It's probably a good idea.
so it's one way I was thinking. Also, another thing that we're doing now at Pharma City, which we've launched this week actually. You know how on Grab or Uber, like after you complete a ride, then it will ask you to rate the driving experience, like 5 stars or 1 star, depending on your experience. Like we started doing that with our pharmacy as well. So we have an app for our customers, and then when our customers come to the store and they buy something, then when they actually complete the transaction, they'll get an alert on their phone that asks them to rate, like, how was the in-store experience. And we're kind of thinking about like doing that on different products as well.
Right.
So we could just kind of get like...
And do that across stores, etc.
yeah.
So you remind me again of a story I heard. I was talking at a health related conference in Korea recently, and there was a great example came up of, I think it was 20 plus hospitals have got together in Korea, and they basically are recording all activity in the hospital, loading it up onto a central server so that they can immediately, on a minute-by-minute basis, compare themselves with across all these 20 hospitals on exactly every activity of the hospital. What's being done, who is it being done to, how long is it taking, is the medicine being done right, are the nurses doing the right thing, is the food being delivered on time, are people eating the food, what do they prefer, are they finishing the whole pudding or only half the pudding, etc., etc., etc. It's very interesting models. Thank you. One more, maybe that gentleman up the back next to Steve. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sadi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm from Limbic, so I'm actually in the middle of this conversation because I'm in artificial intelligence and data science. 2 examples that I want to think of. One, in India, Airtel is one of the largest, it is the largest mobility company. What they have done is they've combined with organizations to use real-time location-based analysis to actually send out offers. One of the most interesting examples, stuff that you won't normally think of, is they tied up with a recruitment company to get them specific profiles based on the location of where specific kind of people go to work, right? So you get, for those guys, they get alerts on their cell phones. They don't know who they are. They don't know who they are. They're using location to kind of, take a guess that 9 out of 10 guys are going to be like this and send out job offers. So that was, I thought, very interesting. This example, the other example that I want to take, which all of us would be familiar with, which is Amazon. When you go onto Amazon, it says, do you also like these, right? Or you may also be interested in these. Now, in both these examples, and we know they work, right? Both these examples, one of the points that came up was the challenge about how, as regulatory pressure increases, how do you actually identify the individual? And therefore, how can you be more effective in sort of what the site tells you? Now, in both these examples, you actually don't know the person, right? So there are algorithms that have come up. Amazon uses collaborative filtering. There are technologies that have come up, AI, machine learning, etc. They can actually find those insights without necessarily those traditional,
Right.
identifiers. So I just wanted to share that.
Very good. Let me just share one example that I've worked on not long ago. Oh, sorry, this has all got screwed up somehow. This is for Otsuka in Japan. They were releasing, or they had released a new drug that was for a particular, people with a particular very severe kidney disease. And basically without the drug you would die. But what they wanted to do was to measure the way in which, as they rolled out the drug, the reaction that it was getting. So they used a artificial intelligence platform that I work with, where instead of having to ask anybody in the 2 test markets, which were Japan and Germany, we were able to track day by day what was the reaction across the internet to that drug. And what it particularly was able to do was to focus on what was the narratives being formed by both users, by support groups, by families, etc., as they were reporting everything on the internet. So if you were tweeting, hey, you know, my suffering husband is using this drug, it got measured. If you were in a support group blog, it got measured, etc. And it allowed us to dramatically measure the differences between the two markets in terms of the way in which responses were happening, how people were reacting to the release, how they were reacting to the treatments, etc., etc. So I think this is sort of like stuff that's in the market research world has become more and more normal. So let me just finish by asking one more question of the guys. Can you think of somebody who's actually using real-time data in a good way right now?
Yeah, I was thinking of this from both, I guess you get sort of aggregate data and you've got sort of personal data. I came armed with a good marketing one, but I was really taken by Vince's one and his presentation. I just love the idea of sort of a geolocator that tracks where you are, then on your behalf measures your exposure to the sun, and then sort of graciously guides you to a store that will then enable you to apply sun protection. But there's real value in that to the consumer. It aligns very much to sort of government agendas and things. So I think for me that was an example I learnt this morning, which was probably better than the one I came with. I just want to maybe add that there's also probably, what's the most meaningful use of real-time data? And I think we tend to sort of look at sort of marketing-led examples. But for me, I think sort of remote monitoring and telemedicine for me is still the most meaningful use of real-time data. Getting access to healthcare, access to specialisms or competencies, no matter where you are in the world. That for me is the most meaningful use of real-time data so far.
Another example? You've already given us one.
Yeah, thanks for reiterating that. I feel the pressure's down a little bit.
Okay.
I think there's pockets of real-time data being used extremely well, particularly around health tech. They are starting to use it because of the analytic power that they have behind the companies they are. There's also less regulations, etc., that sometimes our larger MNCs are tied down in terms of applying that. The other place I'm seeing it is in hospital. There are certain hospital chains who use real-time data extremely well from a process perspective, shifting patients from one unit to another and so forth, and really focused on getting that patient experience at that point seamless. There's a great opportunity there if you ever visit a China hospital in terms of process. But I think they're happening. It's only up.
Jeff?
When I answered the question, I answered it more from a consumer standpoint, and I thought not really yet. I still think it's kind of too young, but I have seen instances of specific applications and it working really well. But I think in terms of like the general consumer and making meaning of it and the level of accuracy, I see it as all still too young, but it's definitely going to go that way, and it's going to be amazing. If you look at how it's progressed over the last 10 years and the rate of adoption, the increase in the technology. So it'll definitely be there, but in my opinion, for the consumer right now, not so much.
And I'll just add one more. Regardless of the 10,000 steps, that's a great application of real-time data usage for the consumer.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think the point is that whether it's myth-based or fact-based, getting people to change behaviour in a positive way is always a good thing. And despite the debate around false facts and everything that we have in the political world today, most people like to react to something that they think is fact-based. So maybe that's where they go. And personally, I think the fact that so many of you shifted to that side of the room says that we all have a huge thirst for this. I know these guys have other examples and stuff. I've got a ton of them. So if you'd like to talk about any more of those, please let me know. Please let these guys know. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody. That's that.
Thank you.